Okay. Hi, folks. Welcome to our panel. How you feeling? It's been a long conference. You getting tired yet? I don't know. I can't see you very well, so I can't really tell what you're saying. But welcome. My name's Rob Abel. I'm the chief exec of an organization called the IMS Global Learning Consortium. We set open standards for educational technology. And the topic today is campus IT leaders as enablers of innovation. So the interplay between information technology and the ability to innovate in terms of student services, academic services, and so forth. And in particular, we've honed in on kind of a hot topic of interest the last couple years, led within the higher education community around something called the Next Generation Digital Learning Environment, or NGDLE. And this is a set of work that was originally funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation through EDUCAUSE to develop some ideas and actually do some research working with some of the leaders of technology across higher education. And IMS was involved in some of those discussions, but as I remember, there were some 50 to 100 or so institutions that actually participated in that research, and a white paper was developed. And to find it, you just have to Google EDUCAUSE, NGDLE, or EDUCAUSE Next Generation Digital Learning Environment. It's a great paper, and it's actually been published in several versions. And I'll also point out that the upcoming issue of EDUCAUSE Review is going to be largely focused on the topic of NGDLE. So what is NGDLE? Let me give you my first kind of introduction, then we'll start talking to the panel about it. But first let me tell you who we have on the panel. This is a very civilized group. I don't think any of them are Greeks, but they're sort of geeks maybe. And we don't really know where the name of the panel came from, but it's kind of a long story. So to my left, we have Casey Green, who many of you probably already know. He's founding director of the Campus Computing Project. Then we have Jack Suess, who's the vice president of information technology and CIO at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Then we have Jim Ptaszynski. Close enough. Pretty close enough. Jim has a very difficult name to spell and pronounce, and is it Russian?
Polish. The I is Polish, Y is usually Russian, Ptaszynski. Or the Polish is Ptaszynski, but anyway.
Okay, it's Polish. This is very important to know the ethical background of every person on the panel, because that really will influence probably their especially if they were meddling in the election in some way, shape, or form. So of course Jim is with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and then last but not least we have Lois Brooks, Vice Provost of Information Services and CIO at Oregon State University. These are four folks that I've known for a long time, and they know higher education about as well as any group of people you're going to find anywhere on the planet, especially as it relates to information technology. So NGDLE, well, if you were to read the white paper, if you had it in front of you, basically it talks about this idea where what do we need for the future for a more flexible learning environment. So how can IT support a more flexible learning environment? And there are some requirements that are laid out in the document based on the research, based on the surveys. A very big one is interoperability, so that the configuration can be more plug and play, lower barriers to entry, as well as switching costs and so forth. But probably the most important feature is personalization. Personalization, the ability to personalize the environment to the needs of the student, and also personalize at a level that's beyond just, say, course access, which of course is where most learning management systems play today, but kind of across the entire student experience, the ability for the student to succeed. And there's several other factors involved along those lines, improving data for analytics, assessment, advising, built into this next generation architecture, as well as collaboration. And last but not least, accessibility is a very, very important requirement to support the needs of all different types of students. But I wanted to start the panel off by basically, we're going to try to talk about this concept both in terms of a visionary aspect, so to motivations for the future, but also in terms of, what could be happening now or what might be happening now that's kind of moving us in that direction. So the first question we have for the panel is really to describe what you think we might be talking about when we talk about something like an NGDLE, and we'll let whoever would like to go first. So who?
I'll jump.
Casey,
Sure.
take it away.
So Rob, thank you, and thank all of you for joining us today. I want to offer a great deal of respect for the efforts of the folks who are trying to do the technical specs and some of the points that you alluded to, Rob. Now, I approach this, I think, in a slightly different perspective, in the sense of if you talk with a faculty member, if you talk with a non-IT administrator, what does that conversation about a next generation learning environment mean? And I think that, much like looking at LinkedIn profiles, if you have to declare yourself to be a thought leader, you're probably not. And I think that's one part of the problem in terms of some of the conversation, in terms of various organizations, not-for-profit and other providers who are trying to work in this environment. I think the second one, and this may be a little too glib, it'll get me in trouble with some, but I'm mindful of Justice Potter Stewart's famous quip in a 1956 Supreme Court definition, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And I think that too is part of the challenge that many faculty have, that when these environments are characterized as a next generation learning environment, that initial encounter with those environments and the initial assessment, well, what will this do for me? How will this help me help my students? Becomes challenging and at times problematic. We see lots of categories. Certainly if you were to think about categories that broadly defined are next generation learning environments, adaptive learning might fall into that. Some of the digital curricular resources that are beginning finally to emerge and have some efficacy in the marketplace, whether they're created on campus or they come from other sources, are part of that. But at least the conversations I have with faculty, the national surveys I do of faculty and of IT officers, still tells me that we are very early in this conversation. Mindful of the fact that we're still early in the conversation we've had about the technology transformation of higher education that began with the arrival of PCs and Macs in the early 1980s.
Wow, Jim?
So if I may, Casey, I'd like to pick up on something you said because I think it really resonates with me. As a former faculty member, we're talking about next generation teaching and learning when we never really talked about, slide projector learning or, overhead projector learning, et cetera, et cetera. To most faculty I talk about, it's all learning. And I think that we kind of do ourselves a disservice by kind of saying, well, this is what we're talking about, as opposed to how does this now become a tool that deeply integrates with what you're doing, your problems of practice. So I think that should be more of our focus.
Excellent.
Lois? I think we need to think about what we mean by learning. If we think of our learning as an ecosystem, for us at Oregon State, we think about our traditional credit-bearing learning, our distance education, but it also means professional education and staff education, open education for the citizens of the state and of the world, continuing education. All of those forms of education are equally important to us. And so we think about the learning environment, the learning ecosystem then needing to support all of these forms of education, not trying to make everything look alike, but to give kind of a supported ecosystem of tools from which the faculty can self-select differentiating tools for the type of outcomes they want to achieve in their class. And the other point I'll say on that is that this is evolving very quickly. There are new tools coming on all the time. We're learning more about learning all the time. And so I think when I think next generation, to me, I think mostly it means non-static.
Yeah, building on what you said is three words that sort of come to mind are integrated, comprehensive, and extensible. And right now, I have felt that often central IT is a barrier to innovation. That as faculty want to look at new tools, how quickly they can decide. Can they decide mid-semester to adopt new tools? That's very difficult for us to adapt quickly and integrate them into a comprehensive environment. And so what I'm looking for the NGDLE to help us provide is this kind of environment where we can, at mid-semester, make adjustments. We can also get data out of those systems to be able to evaluate whether or not those systems were making a difference. And right now, we try innovation, but we have no good way of aggregating data from these variety of tools that we're testing out to be able to see, is it making a difference for students who historically might not succeed in that class? Now they're able to do better. And I think that's what I'm looking for, is this comprehensive environment to be able to give me that kind of environment.
Well, Jack, I think to that point, and points that both Jim and Lois made, I think we're going to find ourselves in 5 to 10 years with a sense of semantic remorse about this title, much as we have a sense of semantic remorse about learning management systems. You know, when those applications, those platforms began to emerge 20 years ago, it was very much about helping faculty manage a course. We call them course management systems, learning management systems. And the sense of semantic remorse I have about that environment of those platforms right now is that, in fact, what we really want are student engagement platforms. How do we make it sticky? And I think that the underlying dimension of some of the specs and the tech issues that you alluded to, Rob, is how do we make this sticky? And Lois, to your point, the artificial barriers or those points on a continuum, it is learning broadly defined. And these kind of buckets that we create, it's online learning, it's hybrid, it's blended, it's traditional or conventional, that serves none of us well in terms of the broader conversation about how do we do this better for more and more of our student populations.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I always have a problem with a title that says next gen, thinking, well, what's going to happen in 10 years? Are we going to call it the next gen, a digital learning environment, or new and improved? Yeah, right. V2.
Yeah, V2. Yeah. But I think, but to your major question there, I think when I think of this next generation digital learning, to me, it's really about giving both students the tools, but also the faculty the tools to take it to the next level. I mean, I've been very impressed with where we're going with these analytical tools, not just how many students have read Chapter 11, but now the capabilities of seeing where in Chapter 11 have they stumbled, where they've had difficulty, you know, if they've read the chapter in marking segmentation, what are the formulas or the vocabulary, et cetera, and is it a matter of the content was poor, was the question poor, and then I as a faculty member can remediate, and I add value to that because it's my radar knowing where I really need to work on.
So this group is obviously very passionate about this topic. We can see that. I wanted to follow up a little bit on Lois's comment about ecosystem, because at one level, you know, an ecosystem of additional tools that faculty can use is something that sort of fits into, you know, current paradigm and so forth of our favorite love-hate relationship with the learning management systems that we have today. And so I was wondering if any of you would want to express a viewpoint of, when you think of NGDLE, or Next Generation Digital Learning Environment, is how big of a step up is it from our current view of learning management system, which is something we talked a lot about actually during the study period, but I'm wondering if you would have an opinion on that. Is it a small step? Is it a kind of mini step? Is it a gigantic leap? Any opinions you might have on that?
Yeah, it's all a continuum. It depends on where you are and what you're trying to accomplish. You know, I think it was Jack who mentioned earlier the need to get data, and that's really driving a lot of this. Can we get the data moving between the components of your system, and can you get the data out and understand what happens to your learners, both within the class proper, but in all the interactions they take with the university? You know, I think for us, I'm increasingly, and particularly at this conference where you walk around and you see so many really interesting ideas and applications, you think, well, to make these work at a university campus, you've got to be able to plug them in, get that data moving, look at them in the context of your entire rich ecosystem of activities around learner success, all the human activities you undertake, and let these technologies underpin those human activities. For us, I mean, I think there's a secret sauce element, and that is we're driving hard on standards so that we can both data standards and technology standards, so we can actually make these things work in our ecosystem and get that data back out again.
Yeah, for me, the thing that's interesting is that most of our classes, I think our faculty do a great job teaching those classes. So if you look, 80% of the classes, they don't need a next-gen digital learning environment. They're doing well, students are successful, we know that they're going on and achieving good things. There's 20%, and especially in the introductory STEM courses, where we know too many students are not succeeding. And when we look at the capabilities of those students coming in from the K through 12 system, we think they should be. And so part of this is historical in that a lot of STEM courses have always been washout courses. And what we have to be thinking about is, do we really want that to continue? And so where we're really trying to focus our efforts and think about these next-gen digital learning environments is comprehensively rethinking some of these introductory STEM courses or other courses where we have high failure rates that it's obvious we need to be rethinking the pedagogy and the way that we're teaching that course.
Yeah, for all of you who began your collegiate careers thinking you wanted to go into medicine, organic chemistry is the classic case of a course designed to push you elsewhere. But I want to come back to Lois's point about an ecosystem, because I think the one part of the ecosystem we don't talk about enough, and there's a belated recognition about how important it is the issue of user support. That much of the conversation has been focused on platforms, it's been about applications, it's about analytics, it's about data, and I think there's a belated and long overdue recognition about how critical the issue of support becomes in this environment. At least in the work that I do, the best implementations of technology are not technology as an alternative to what some might say is the conventional high-touch college classroom experience, because often it's not. But in fact, it's tech-enabled high-touch. And too often, that's not part of the conversation. We have not built that into the ecosystem. We've not understood that to be an essential part of the infrastructure for faculty members as well as for students. And in the absence of that, then in fact, it's just technology as opposed to an effective intervention and an effective opportunity.
Okay, good. Go ahead. Yesterday, Bridget Bird in a session said technology is not the innovation. How people use the technology is the innovation. And so I couldn't agree with you more, Casey. I really think that many faculty want to use technology effectively, but they don't know how to. Your survey itself for the last 10 years have shown as the number one or number two thing, faculty training is one of those barriers. And I think that's something that really needs to be addressed in order for them to effectively use this.
So I do think one of the important elements that NGDLE was trying to address is the fact that today this integration of disparate technologies is very clumsy. It's clumsy for both the faculty member and the learner. And as a result, we are actually exacerbating the support problems when we try to innovate, because all of these things are one-offs and they're ending up looking different, and so students get confused where they are, how things work. And I think one of the opportunities in thinking about both standards and the NGDLE is if we create well thought out environments, we can lower the support requirements for both faculty and students to be able to succeed and use these disparate tools.
I just want to jump in if I can, because I really agree with what you're saying about support, but I think that's only half of the equation. And that's kind of a central IT point of view. We're giving you these tools, we need to make sure you're effective in the way you use them. But we have to be equally as effective in letting these faculty who are so innovative come to us and say, we've got some new ideas that you need to work with and learn about as well. We need to be able to bring in new ideas and innovation as well as just push it out.
Yeah, this is what's kind of running through the back of my mind, and we didn't actually answer the question of kind of the delta from
You wanted answers?
the LMS. But it sort of sounded like there was a range there. But when I think of next generation digital learning environment, I think, well, what is next generation? Is it the learning environment or is it the actual learning? In other words, are we defining next generation learning? Are we defining next generation learning environment? Or are we defining both at the same time? And I think already we've seen a couple of different perspectives on the panel where some of the techniques for next generation learning might be coming from the faculty. Some might be coming from sort of outside the faculty, maybe adaptive learning fits into that approach or what have you. And Jack sort of made the comment, we have a lot of faculty who, are just doing just great, and so, but on the other hand, faculty are, especially in many community colleges, for instance, my wife happens to be a professor at community college, very, very good program. Matter of fact, they've ranked number one out of like 2,500 institutions in terms of passing of the NCLEX, which is the nursing test. But they're under constant pressure to be more engaging, have the classes be more engaging, engage students more, and I forget who said engaging earlier, but so
All three of us.
all three of us. So
All four of us, I'm sorry.
So the question in my mind is, do we know where the next generation learning techniques are coming from? I know Gates Foundation has made quite a few investments in that area, or do we not know, and how effective they are? Does anyone have any comments on that and where they come from? Where do these ideas come from, and how do we make sure they're supported through the information technology services?
I think that a lot of what we see in the courseware environment is really around not just necessarily the technology that provides affordances, but rather all the new learning science that we're starting to see, especially around adaptive and active learning. They afford that in that environment. And the other thing that we're finding is that in the implementation of some of these next generation learning capabilities, it causes the institution to do course redesign. And that whole process, it forces them into the process of looking how they've been doing things and how they want to do it in the future. So just as important as putting the technologies in, the active learning in, is that whole redesign and looking at things that they may have not looked at for decades.
So that's really interesting. So should IT be part of course redesign efforts? Because let me put it this way. So if a faculty member, you know, or a whole faculty across a program, for instance, uses a certain set of technology in the classroom, let's just say a smartboard or something like that, you know, who's at blame if that doesn't work? Well, I think it's probably clearly IT would bear some, you know, amount of the burden of, well, hey, that technology should be working, it should be easy to use. But what about this clumsiness of, well, we're actually using 3 products for this program, and they need to work very seamlessly for the students and the teachers. Is that IT's problem, or is that
I think it's a problem of this whole ecosystem. It's not only the Teaching and Learning Center and IT, but also vendors/partners out there that need to also come into the conversation. How are their features reacting to what the faculty want and the administration wants, et cetera?
All right. Any other thoughts on that?
I will say it's been interesting in that often we, for pedagogical reasons, faculty often think they want to do more than they're going to actually do in a class. And we over-design things. We have some active learning classrooms that have media so that any computer can display to any screen that's in the room. The reality is that nobody ever uses it because it's so complicated at the instructor platform to be selecting the right ones that nobody bothers to use it. And so as we're rethinking the way we do active learning spaces, they're now bringing IT in, and what we're trying to do is simplify. We think simplification is really key, especially when you're going to have often lecturers or adjuncts occasionally in there teaching classes. You've got to be able to have something that's easy to use.
But I think, Jack, that speaks to a design issue that we've experienced for 40 years. With good intent, whether it's folks on campuses or folks on the provider community have said, here, we have a gift for you. We want to give you the equivalent of digital fire in one way or another. You know, whether that's a computer in the 1980s, the internet, mobility, whatever else these things are. And too often the end users are at the last part of the design conversation as opposed to the front end of the design conversation. It's not malicious, but and the second part of that to me is often the folks who are offering the gifts, whether they're on campus or they're in the provider community. In fact, you are not designing for yourself. You are not your client, the actual end user. That the folks who are doing design are designing or thinking about a population that's entirely different from their own experience as an undergraduate, as a graduate student, in different environments, different demographics, different learning environments, and yet saying here, without necessarily testing and having that design conversation early on when it really is essential.
I think we're all learning and getting better at this with every passing year, to be honest. But I also think the days when we as central IT handed out new technology like they were nuggets of gold, those days are gone. I mean, our faculty and students are out there, they're active, they're smart, they're capable, they're using devices we've never heard of, and particularly at a science and engineering school like ours, it's a very, very rich ecosystem, not just of the technology tools, but the sheer kind of expertise and variation of the people in the mix. And I think, you know, kind of the tone of this conversation that's all kind of a central package we've got to put together, we absolutely have to simplify this, and we have to pick up our pace on making these things work. But it's no longer our domain to dictate to the university. That ship sailed 10 years ago.
All right. So one of the questions we prepared for was some institutional examples of what might be an effective NGDLE. And I don't know if you folks had a chance to think about that, but if you have, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. How do we know we have an NGDLE? What would be an example of something that would be an effective?
Austin Community College, they're having a session at 1 o'clock this afternoon and talking about how they have this, they've taken over a mall in Austin and created this math emporium They have developed, or using McGraw's ALEX, and then have these floating faculty members and instructional designers and all these other folks in a football field-sized classroom. And at first I thought, how could this ever possibly work? And then after visiting and basically putting a lot of steps on my Fitbit going back and forth on the classroom, really saw where there was an innovative use of both the technology and the human component of this. So I would cite them as an example.
Mm-hmm. And so, and you have evidence of outcomes in that particular case as well.
They have, more importantly, they have evidence of outcomes.
Yeah.
And that's why their session this afternoon, I'm going to be joining.
Okay, there you go. What time is that?
1 o'clock in the envoy room.
Oh, 1 o'clock. That's after.
I think Georgia State, to a lesser, unfortunately, extent, Michigan State have been doing some really interesting thing with analytics. Georgia State, as some of you know, has essentially eliminated the graduation gap between different student populations. That's analytic driven, but in fact, there's a very high touch component to that follows the analytics, as opposed to just sending out emails saying, Casey, you're having problems in a particular class, given what we've been able to monitor on your online and other kinds of performance. That there's a very rich support environment for those students that makes the where the analytics leads and the other follows and supports in terms of both the academic and other support systems for those students. As one example, as we talk about analytics as being one component of that.
Right.
So did you want to go?
Oh, go ahead, I'll go.
So one of the projects that we did a pilot this past spring and we want to launch in the fall is we're leveraging the analytics in the LMS. Now, what we're really trying to do, especially in math and STEM courses, is we've had this effort where faculty will notify at roughly the 5th or 6th week students that are at risk. Problem, of course, is students have already flunked the first exam. They're probably, a D or an F at this point. Can they dig themselves out? About half usually do. What we're looking at with this product, which is using some machine learning technology, is to try to move to the 2nd or 3rd week to be able to do that prediction before the exam. So if you give a quiz, we know some demographic data. If we can get them in the week before they take the final exam, to be, that first exam, to be studying up and getting in a study group, we think we can change the dynamic of having as many kids that are at risk. And to me, moving some of those kinds of support tools where you use data. Now, where I would love to see the NGDLE come into existence is while I can get lots of great LMS data out of this, I can't easily integrate my textbook data. So if we've got an electronic textbook, I'm not able to easily pull all that data in to be able to help make better predictions of who's actually reading the textbook and who's not and things like that. That's where I think we want to go over the next few years.
Okay.
I would add, we're at Oregon State, we're working in partnership with 10 other large universities in a partnership called Unison, and what we're doing is a cloud scale play working with each other to elevate our next generation learning environment, building out the technology underpinnings with common purpose and common resources. And not that we're all at this moment peeking inside each other's courses or breaking confidentiality, but we are using our collective resources and our collective weight to move forward our relationship with vendors and with publishers, to move forward our ability to collect analytics, to move forward our ability to manage our own data and support our university needs. So we're taking, I would say, kind of a next generation approach to how higher education solves this problem collectively.
So I saw a very compelling example of this at the University of North Carolina. Dr. Kelly Hogan teaches a 400-person biology course, 3 sections, one of the washout courses. And over the last several years has effectively eliminated the differences between African-American students and first-generation students and the rest of the population. Part of it's done by very much active learning techniques, but also the other part is next-generation learning technology. Very successful. A lot of research coming out of that.
So we're seeing examples, and really the question might be, how does technology and IT best support scaling those various types of examples of success? For instance, I think one of the, for those of you who are, and probably most of you involved in higher education, we know that change takes a while, and the motivators of change are a really important thing to try to understand. And I think maybe the next line of discussion might be around, where do you see the leadership for this type of movement we're talking about here coming from, and how does it practically happen? So, you know, faculty, academic leadership, IT, president, provost, et cetera. Any thoughts on that topic? Jim shaking his head up and down.
So I kind of really like a pincer kind of strategy. I mean, you have to have the involvement of the faculty, but them alone, no matter how great work they do, they're islands of excellence. When they do or do not get tenure, they move, it dies or it doesn't scale. So you have to have senior leadership involved, and usually that's the provost or someone from the provost office or all the way down to the dean's office. So they need to support with incentives, be it in the tenure and promotion system, to give them some value to improving their teaching. They have to give them the release time, the training, ability. So there needs to be some institutional support there. The biggest one, I think, is from the president's office and the provost's office. It has to be integral to the strategic plan. It may not be called out, but somehow it needs to be feed into the strategic plan those 2 or 3 things that they have top of mind that the president talks about at commencement and Founders Day, et cetera, et cetera. Otherwise, it's probably not going to get done.
And is the sort of level of motivation around this sort of, let's call it a larger scale transformation, is it directly related to, you know, that institutional mission? And so, in other words, if the way I would guess I would put it is if an institution thinks it's doing really, really well, it may not be as motivated as an institution that maybe sees a gap between where it is and where it wants to go.
Well, the 2 things I do is when someone says they're really motivated to improve student success and learning and it's in their mission, I not only look at their mission statement, but then I look at their Board of Trustees meetings. Is this part of that conversation? Is it part of the Faculty Senate meetings? Are they really, you know, walking the talk?
Interesting. Other comments on leadership?
No, please.
You're in the swamp. You're on campus, so.
So, you know, what's interesting to me as I think about this is that I think one of the challenges we have faced at my institution is we've done some really interesting, innovative things. The challenge comes up that you just cannot interchange faculty across those innovative things very easily. So you redesign the freshman chemistry class or the calculus class or the linear algebra class or the biology class. The reality is that all of the biology faculty are not interchangeable to be able to teach that class now. And one of our challenges that I think we have to be thinking about is when we're looking at some of these key courses that we want to redesign, it's not going to be something that you can do in the standard faculty rotation, that we're going to have instructional faculty who really care solely about instruction, that are helping to drive a lot of these changes, especially in either the large lecture or the high failure type classes that often dominate the first and second year, because it takes time to learn how to teach and use these methods. And assuming you can just take anyone who is a tenured or tenure track faculty member and put them in a class where you've redesigned the learning environment and they'll be able to be comfortable with it and be successful, that's a real challenge. And I think that's not something that we've faced yet. We've been doing some of this innovation, but then when we're sort of sticking the teacher who does the innovation with being stuck with having to teach that class ad nauseum.
Interesting.
And Jack, I think part of the mixed messaging to faculty is that there's no recognition and reward for those efforts.
Yeah.
You know, we've tried to encourage in various ways faculty to go digital, go technology, and yeah, big deal. You throw your syllabus up on a website or some stuff on an LMS. But for those who individually say, look, my portfolio of scholarship includes some of these other issues, whether I'm involved in course redesign or I'm with colleagues at a critical gateway course, or I'm doing something in my own courses. The fact is that department chairs and senior faculty often have to stand with and stand up for these folks as well as part of review and promotion. 35 years ago, Ernie Boyer, who was chair of the Carnegie Commission, was chancellor of the SUNY system, in a book called On Scholarship, articulated a much broader and a much far more encompassing definition of scholarship that went beyond the research-driven notion of scholarship in elite universities. And in fact, we have to bring that and stand up and do that. You know, I think about the experience at campuses during the millennia. dozens, if not hundreds of campuses talked about Acme College in the 21st century, and technology was going to drive what we do, or Acme College 2020. And yet it was a statement, often on paper, occasionally on a website, but there was no way to connect the digital dots, there was no implementation plan, and there was no recognition and reward for the faculty. The work that I do, our annual surveys of IT officers, do you have a way to recognize and reward the faculty who say this is part of what we do? Barely 1 in 5 campuses. And that's consistent whether it's an elite research university or a community college that has an explicit teaching mission. That stuff's got to change.
I think, no, Lois, you had something, go
I
ahead.
just wanted, actually, if I could go back to your earlier question, Rob, which is who leads this?
Yeah.
And I think it's actually maybe not the right question. I think the question might be who must be present to succeed in this. It's a team sport to engage learner success. And we've talked about the role of the faculty, the role of the leadership of the university. At many universities and colleges, there's intense scrutiny right now on learner success. And you realize this is an ocean of activity with a lot of lakes and streams feeding into that ocean. I think we think about the leadership, the faculty being engaged, but I think there's never been a more strategic role for the CIO than there is at this moment to say we can amplify great teaching, we can bring personalization, and we can do a high touch. We are part of the solution to be able to enact this great teaching and this change that you're talking about. But the fact of the matter is that no university will succeed in next generation learner success unless you've got the entire team at the table making this a priority.
Right. So kind of this idea that the impetus to change could come really from anywhere, come from the top, it could come from the bottom, or come from the middle, so to speak. But
it's
the
all
idea is
gonna
you
come
need
together.
the team cohesion, right, to make it happen. And
Yes.
I just find it really fascinating because in a past life I used to do a lot of work in online education, and what we found in working with universities is that course redesign was awesome, but more importantly it was the program redesign, because really the whole student journey is around the program, not around just the course. And I think that's also a fascinating sort of area to look for leadership. But I would assume it's sort of heresy if IT is coming forward and saying, well, we know about teaching and learning or something like that. Is that kind of an issue, or what's the receptivity? I mean, I personally really am into this idea of, technology and teaching and learning fusing, together. But I think we're pretty early in that sort of transformation, or in education at large, or are we? I don't know. What do our CIOs
A lot of
think?
that really depends on campus culture and the personalities at various tables, not just one table. That may work at one campus, it may work at another, it may not work at another, it may depend upon, there's a pendulum in terms of, pardon?
May work in math, but not in science. It's not just a whole campus.
Well, and also, a new president or a new provost comes in and wants to move the deck chairs, and comes with new priorities, has different ways of approaching a set of how things will go forward and who's involved with that may or may not align, or maybe a new direction in terms of where the campus is going on these issues. Jack, you made a point earlier that Rob, you just touched on again, this whole issue of redesign. You talked about, can we do this mid-year? Our business schools and engineering schools talk and occasionally teach about continuous quality improvement. Yet we look for the operational manifestation of that at large. It just doesn't happen. We're locked into a very rigid calendar cycle. We're locked into a very rigid review cycle. We are incredibly risk aversive, and we use data as a weapon as opposed to a resource too often, in terms of asking the question, well, how did you screw up, as opposed to how can you use the analytic tools and the data to say, this is the path to doing better.
Right.
So I would just add that one ways that we have really found for partnering and helping to be a part of this conversation is our instructional technology group is co-joined with our faculty development center. And so as faculty are coming in and having conversations about how can they improve their teaching, it's often about rethinking what the goals of the class are going to be. And often they start with 10 or 12 or 15 goals, and what the Faculty Development Center helps them get down to is, well, what are 4 or 5 really important things that need to come out that the student has to learn for the next class? Often technology can be a tool for helping to make that happen. Right. And I think that's where we then get involved in helping them look at options, tools, new ways of thinking. And so I would agree with Lois, it's really it's a community effort for trying to help these. No one has all the answers. to do this right.
Should we be shining a bigger light on this whole concept of the Faculty Development Center? Because in my days at Collegius, we actually managed and set up some of those faculty development centers, and they had big names, but they had really very, very small amount of staffing and resources associated with them. And I don't know, I'm just wondering, this is kind of an off-the-cuff question, I'm just wondering on your, I mean, if we really want to establish these kind of teams, right, we have to have the resources to be able to do that, and it just isn't clear to me that we do at this point or not, but what's going on at Oregon State around this?
Well, I mean, it's overly simplistic, but you can really accomplish anything. You just can't accomplish it all at the same time. Particularly in our distance education, we have a huge and a very well-regarded distance education program at Oregon State, and we use a rubric called Quality Matters that really attended to the quality in those courses. In fact, this is kind of so amazing to me. About 2 years ago, we completely swapped out our learning management system, and so we had to move 6,000 courses. For all of our distance courses, and there were thousands of them, they touched every single one and improved it while they moved it. It was a pretty heavy lift, but it was a fantastic opportunity to say, not just let's get the moving van over and get the boxes unpacked, but let's really redesign the house a little bit while we're at it. But you've got to take those opportunities, put the resources in, and they're not sustainable at that level across the board, but they're sustainable in kind of sprints of activity to do improvement. We're working right now a very heavy focus, like many universities, on improving our math curriculum, or I should say improving our math outcomes. I think algebra is the same algebra I took in school as well, but really thinking about how we use different teaching methodology, different student engagement methodology, different personalized learning, different technology interventions, all of these things to help make sure that our students get through those gateway math courses and really have the outcomes they need to succeed in the upper division classes. So a lot going on, and I think UMBC has a fantastic story around your science curriculum and what you've done.
Yeah. Yeah, we have really been trying to redo the introductory biology chemistry sequence, and that has had much improvement in terms of student success, at least in the first and second chemistry courses, which are sort of fundamental to most STEM careers or engineering that are there.
How about Lois said the kind of two magic words there, personalized learning. It's quite a buzz phrase going around in the whole education sphere, higher ed and K-12. What does personalized learning mean to each of you in terms of this next generation digital learning? Do you have a more specific definition?
Let Jack go in the next.
Throw me under the bus. So for me, what was interesting is there was a New York Times editorial today, Tom Friedman, talking about the fact that it really is absolutely essential for lifelong learners, for people to be lifelong learners now, that you can't assume that you can just get a college degree, master a topic, and then not have to keep learning and be successful in your career and jobs. And I think that for me, what I'm looking for is that we're training the students to be thinking about the multitude of resources that are out there that they can continue their learning once they leave the university. And to date, I don't think we're doing enough in thinking about that. How do you leverage some of the MOOCs, or how do you take advantage of some of the things like Khan Academy or other areas to be building things in? And to me, that would be an interesting effort for us to be sort of integrating those resources more in the undergraduate curriculum, so that we're also preparing students to be taking advantage of them as they leave to continue with their learning environments.
I see. Interesting.
A little bit of a niche thread, but the single largest growing population of learners in the United States are people returning to college, either to do degree completion, to do a degree mid-career, to get credentials, to boost their career. It's really a different demographic. And we've heard numbers coming out of Pew and other organizations in the number of like 80% of learners will be these non-traditional learners. And you think about what it means to try to manage getting a college degree or getting extra credentials while you're working. Maybe you've got a family or other family care issues at home. And you think about what that means in the learner's ability or need to be able to stop and start at different times, to accelerate over a vacation and then take some downtime, but to really break out of this structured semester or quarter cycle that we've been on, to get credit along the way, so you don't have to wait until you get through your 120 credits to get a credential, to get a career boost, but to be able to show progress along the way. And so it really kind of starts to challenge us in the academy to start to think differently about our delivery structures, our business structures, the way that we accredit ourselves. And I think this is probably the biggest sea change that we're going to be seeing, the notion of what personalized really means to a new group of learners.
Very interesting. Other thoughts on?
Well, just adding one more thing to what Lois said is that, as we look at our students, even students who come as first-time, full-time freshmen, at least 40% of them who graduate are going to take courses at other institutions along the way. They're taking classes at the community college, or they're taking classes at another, because they're taking them summer, winter, wherever it's closest as a location, or because they like the online option. And so we have to recognize that we're going to be bringing a large fabric of courses into the system from other institutions, and making sure that we've thought about that.
And it's hard, actually, tackling what credit to give for prior learning.
Yeah.
We have a fairly significant population at OSU of people who have come out of the military and are now going for degree completion, and they have significant things they've learned in their service, and trying to understand how to count that and credit it is challenging.
Very good. Well, we've only got 4 minutes left. The time flies when you're up here having fun. I'm wondering if any of you would like to kind of re-emphasize or make some final points based on the discussion we've heard, just to kind of reinforce with the audience what you think might be the most important takeaways from this discussion. Anyone?
I think for me, there's two things. One, this has to be an integral part and tied to the institution's overall strategy in order to gain traction, resources, et cetera. And the other thing is that we really need to involve faculty from the front end and give them the kind of support and incentives, et cetera, in order to really holistically integrate this in the learning environment.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
For those of you who are ed entrepreneurs, you are not your client. So actually go someplace that you've never been, talk with people who are not like you on college campuses, faculty and students. If you think you have a great idea, you better get out there and really talk with folks to find out if in fact it really is a great idea. If you're a solution searching for a problem, or if in fact you have a real solution that addresses a real issue.
And if I could throw in something there, is this whole idea of redesign of courses, curriculum, and so forth does really require products working together. And by that, I don't just mean interoperability standards. I mean really products that really do complement each other and complement the lives of teachers and students. And I do think that's a whole new mindset for suppliers in this marketplace. So.
Yeah, I was just going to amplify that as for ed tech suppliers that are in the audience. We need systems that are standards-based. We've got to be able to integrate these things with other tools that we're doing. And we need people to be evolving those standards to the next generation of standards, not just we've done it 5 years ago and we don't need to be updating that as time goes by.
Right.
Last one for the ed entrepreneurs, your price is not my cost. So when you go knocking at Jack's door or Lois's door or anybody else's door, and you say you've got a wonderful widget that is a next generation learning environment, remember the LinkedIn thing, if you are a thought leader, if you have to declare yourself a thought leader, you may not be. Nonetheless, whatever your price is, it's going to cost these folks and their colleagues 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6x, both in time and resources, to actually implement it effectively.
All right.
Yes, what he said.
Thank you.
You don't have any parting shots for
No,
the...
I think the one thing I would say is actually for the entrepreneurs, be really cognizant of everything they said, but that you may have the coolest technology ever. And I will say I've seen some pretty cool things here in the last few days, but everything you talk to us about is one tiny little piece of a very complex puzzle. And we're thinking about this entire complex puzzle and how to bring your piece in and make it make sense in the context of a lot of other things. So you're looking at something through one side of a prism, but we're looking at the entire rainbow of colors that we've got to make sense to our faculty.
And if I can
What
tag
she
on-
said.
And to tag on to that, Lois, one of the things I think is that, choosing technology is hard, paying for it is hard, supporting it is hard, et cetera. But the hardest thing is the organizational change required to effectively use it. I've seen so many technologies that sit on a shelf and not used because the organizational change is not adhered to.
Wow, so this has been quite an encompassing discussion, and I've really enjoyed it, and I'd like to thank the audience for coming and thank our panelists as well. Thank you very much.